do whatever you're going to do. So Steve, I just want this to be real conversational.
That's great.
And it's nice to give teachers some insight into what happens, with the reading, the scoring, and so on. But I could introduce you at length, but I kind of want them to hear from you. So can you kind of give us a little bit of your background, and how you became chief reader, and your background with AP?
Yeah. My background at times has been pretty traditional, and then at times I've followed some different paths, and it's partly how I got to be chief reader, just following along some paths. So my background, English major, I went to graduate school at LSU, and literature background there. My dissertation was on 18th century British novels, Samuel Richardson, and so pretty traditional route that way. After I graduated from LSU, that summer before I started at Mississippi College, I actually started there in 1999, and left for a few years and came back in 2008. But that summer after graduate school, I needed a job, and I asked this Mississippi College if I could teach summer school there, and they were filled up. And the chair at the time said, you should apply to be an AP reader, AP literature reader. And I had no idea what it was. I didn't have AP background. We didn't have AP classes when I was in high school. That summer, I applied. They were already booked up. The reading was just like a week off. But in 2000, I got invited to Daytona Beach as a reader. And so it was just sort of luck that the chair just was trying to find something for me to do and recommended to do the reading. And so that's what got me started in it. And I was a reader for 5-6 years, and every year I liked it more. So if there's anybody out there who hasn't done the reading yet, those first couple of days can be a little daunting. I was talking with Kristen about this, and boy, that first day I was like, what have I gotten myself into? Like reading and reading and reading. But you get into the swing of it, and I quickly just found out how much I loved it. The camaraderie, the people I met. I met people in Daytona Beach those first couple of years as readers that I'm still in touch with. Just a really great community. And then in terms of how I ended up where I am now, it's just been kind of opportunities and invitations. So every year I'd wait for my invitation to come back. And then one year they asked me if I wanted to be a table leader. And I thought, well, sure. And then along the way, somebody said, do you want to be a question leader? And I thought, well, if you want me to. And so a couple of years ago, they said, hey, we think you should apply to be chief reader. And I thought, all right, well, we'll try that. So it's just been kind of opportunities and some blessing to have these invitations, and kind of just found myself doing this now for the last few years.
And I was just beside myself happy when I heard that you were going to become the next chief reader, because we had talked about it when I was there, and
right.
And with David, the previous chief reader, who everybody loved, as well, being at the same university, we didn't know if that could happen, and so I'm glad that they recognized what they had, and so I know the teachers just love what you're able to do for them, Steve, and the leadership that you provide there. So thank you, and thanks for kind of providing that, and again for doing this with us this evening.
Of course,
and please give our love to David, because he's missed.
I will.
We care greatly for him too. So real quickly, for those of us who've been to the reading, we may be able to answer this, but maybe not, because not everybody here has been to the reading. This is an excellent window into it. Why does the reading matter?
Partly it matters because we've got 360,000 students who have taken this exam, right? And they've written 3 essays, and they trust us to read them. And we always talk about scoring them accurately, consistently, respectfully. Whether you've read 500 essays or 2,000 essays, that next one you read we want you to read it like it's the first time you've read an essay. And we want you to read that essay like it's your own student, because every one of those essays we read is somebody's student, and so it matters because the students matter and their work matters, and they're entrusting us with this task. So But to me, that's the most important reason, because we've got these students who have, they're trusting us to read these essays really carefully and to help them to get the credit that they've earned. But I think it also matters because we're human beings doing this reading. And I think that's one thing that just continues to distinguish AP program. Not only that the test itself is designed by teachers from the bottom up. It's not a test. It's not a top-down standardized test. But we're human beings, and a lot of tests are beginning to be scored by computers. And with all this chat stuff we're seeing coming out, you're going to see more of that. And I think it's really, really important that we are human beings and that this is part of the process. And so we respect the thinking that students do, and we respect the writing that they do. And the best way you can honor that work is by, as people, as teachers, doing that work for them during the week of the reading.
I know every teacher here and every parent here loves what you said about, that every essay is somebody's, my phrase was somebody's child, but you said somebody's student. Somebody,
Yeah.
It could be your own kid. And it's so hard on day 4, day 5 to read that essay at 1 p.m. after lunch and remind yourself of that.
Yeah.
But the reading leadership is so gracious and so thoughtful about reminding us, breaking us, working with the samples. And so as one person said when you started to respond, it's such a great professional development opportunity.
Yeah.
Nowhere else in the world, you all, really, nowhere else in the world do higher ed faculty and high school teachers come together like this to focus on content and assessment. I mean, it's really an amazing opportunity, even if you do it virtually. So
right.
No,
for sure.
Yeah. So can you fill us?
Yeah, if I could share one quick anecdote,
just about, please do.
Like you mentioned that this is somebody's student or somebody's child. A while back, when I was a question leader on question 2, I had a teacher come up to me and say that her daughter took the exam that year. And so it just sort of hits you like somewhere in that room. And this is back when we even had hard copies of the essays and everything. So in one of those folders, in one of those stacks, was her daughter's exam booklet, and I mean, it theoretically could even come across her table or certainly in the room with her. She was that close to her daughter's work. And every year now, that same teacher will come up to me and give me an update. And so it's been about 8 years. Her daughter has a job. She's finished graduate school.
Wow.
And she still talks about AP literature, right? And the impact that it had on her and as she takes that work forward. But I feel really fortunate that teacher let me know that, because I always remember that person, not only about the year they took the exam, but they continue on afterwards.
Because it is so easy for these things to become an abstraction. That helps ground you. I really appreciate that too.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about not everyone here, like I said, has been to the reading. But the teachers who are teaching it, the teachers who are in it, are still thinking about those scores every day. So can you talk a little bit about how you all navigate the difference between grading and scoring?
Yeah, well, simplest terms, grading is what you do at your school. So in your own classroom, with your own students, with your own assignments. When we talk about scoring, it's an assessment of a more limited aspect and elements and objectives. And so grading can incorporate so many things. Certainly the objectives for an assignment, but sometimes it may take process into account, sometimes effort. There's always different context, interpersonal things, and how grades are arrived at, where those grades are situated. So what we do at the reading is drastically different from that. And one of the big differences is that we each have our own idiosyncratic or personal classroom-based grading practices, right? Things that we value that other teachers might not. Certainly there's consistencies across classrooms, but we each have our own hobby horses of things students shouldn't do, can't do, must do, and those impact grades that students will earn. And so in terms of scoring, we always talk about the mind of the room, right? We are each on the exact same page, and we have all 1,500 readers are sharing those same scoring guides, right? And so we each know what we're looking for. We've got this, a new scoring guide that you played a big role into developing, and it's really paying off. I think we're such better readers now than we used to be with this new scoring guide. And it's really clear that we're valuing thesis, we're valuing evidence and commentary, we're valuing students who can ideally connect ideas to that line of reasoning. And some of the students can even reach those levels of sophistication, right? For that additional point in row C. And we're each looking at those exact same things. And so it can build more consistency. We try to set aside our own, what we personally value, different ways of phrasing things, ways of writing things. But scoring is really, we're all wanting to do it the same way and assessing the same things because we value the same things. And so students are going to know that ahead of time. And they're going to know what we're looking for. And then our job is to look for those things.
Thank you. I mean, just so well said. Thank you. And some of the comments in the chat were saying, it really does help to kind of level set the expectations. And I think, I mean, it really made me reflect on what standards I was holding my students to,
right,
relative to what the college expectations were, and balancing that with my specific contexts, and also students working through the process and still trying to reward them for what they do well without patronizing. And it's hard. Right. It's hard, when we start talking about motivation that way and things like that. So I really appreciate that. But you,
well, hey, real quick. I think you raise a really good point about, we talk about it being different, but then my classroom grading has improved so much myself over the years, because at the reading, when you think about backward design, right? So the students know what we're going to assess. And as readers, I know what I should be looking for, right? So is there a thesis? How are the students handling evidence and commentary? Are they singular points? Are they starting to connect those things? And so as I'm reading those essays, I can see concrete that